Now, I am going to talk about reentry. I had a presentation which we decided to kind of curtail today. We talk about metrics in business. How do we measure our productiveness? How do we know we're actually affecting a change? And I was at a meeting with Ray Dalton. We were talking about how do we measure that. And his anecdotal evidence was this. You know a man successfully reenters when people stop asking him what he did and asks, what does he do? So I want to talk to you just for the next 10 minutes about how that transaction took place in my life. Because in 1989, I was a student at Case Western. My brother was a law student at Temple University. My father was in his 4th term as a county commissioner, and I was arrested for aggravated murder. My older brother had beaten his college roommate to death. I helped him move the body, flee the scene, lie to the police, and I was charged as an accomplice. And when I was 20 years old, I was indicted with death specifications. So I know that which I am speaking. A reentry happens at arrest, but the person who gets arrested has to make the choice. Now, I was blessed to have a whole series of men who built into my life at arrest. I had a detective who took an interest in me and looked past the facts and saw the human being and didn't allow the system to jade him. I had an employee at the county jail who took an interest in me. And every day off of his shift, after first shift, he would come to my cell and build into my life to encourage me. I was sentenced to 21 to 50 years, and I was sent to Lorraine Correctional Institution where I was going to do my time. I met a man named Norman Hills, who is here today. Norm was the warden at the institution I was in, and he made me his clerk. And I worked for him for a number of years until he transferred out. And Norm built into my life. Now, as the warden of an institution, that's not really your job assignment. But everybody who touched my life along the way went above and beyond to give me that extra opportunity. Didn't see me as the number I wore on my chest, but actually looked at me as a human being who had value. While I was there, I had opportunities. The prison system provided education, so I took every college class I could. I had a couple associate degrees, took a correspondence program through Ohio University, got my business degree. And I started writing novels. So I wrote a murder mystery that dealt with 2 brothers, and one would not testify. They say, write what you know, right? So I had 2 books published. And in the year 2000, I wrote a short story. It was the crucifixion as told through the eyes of Barabbas. Because I figured if anybody knew that Jesus died in this place, it was that guy. I sent my manuscript off to the War Cry magazine. They sent me a check for $300. And every month the magazine would come to our chapel and I would look through it, and they never published my story. Well, in the year 2006, I was released from prison. I had served 17 years. I had not a lot of prospects for employment. I had no place to live and no car, no clothes. But I did have hope. So I went to my first job interview on 22nd Street here in Cleveland to apply for an IT position, just scrapping computers. And back then they didn't have ban the box, so on the application right at the top, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Check yes or no. So I checked yes, and it says, please explain. And they give you a line that's that long. So I wrote down, I will explain during the interview. And I turned it back in. So I'm sitting in the big lobby over at Salvation Army's district headquarters, very ornate. And the security guard starts flipping through my application. All of a sudden he starts staring at me. Then he's really staring at me. That's why he found that felony box, didn't he? So as I'm having this scaring contest with this security guard, I didn't want to keep this going for a while, so I picked up the April 2006 War Cry magazine. I flipped to the center story. It's my story. I sold it to them while I was an inmate at Trumbull Correctional Institution. It was published 6 years and 6 days later, the day of my job interview. So I go into the HR person's office, and I'm going through the application process, and she's going through my questioning. How did you get a college degree in prison? You have a copy of your transcript? You have the transcript. How did you get Microsoft certified in prison? So every question she asked ended with the phrase, in prison. In prison? What did you do in prison? So finally, at the end of my application, I put down I was a published author, and she goes, yeah, right. Do you have any samples of anything you've written? So I picked up the magazine, and I handed it to her. I said, I am the feature story in your international magazine this month. And they gave me the job. Hey, because God has a plan, does he not? That was in 2006, and since that time I went on staff at a church. Thank you. That's God's plan. This is the long version of the story I'm condensing to you for 15 minutes that you have a copy of. I wanted staff at a church to get involved in prison ministry. I had a very unique, very narrow skill set and did that for a number of years. I was hired in November with 5 years of parole. And back then, the rule was you couldn't go back into prison as a volunteer unless you were off of parole for 1 year. So I really couldn't even do the job they hired me for 5 years. I was invited to a reentry seminar at Windows on the River, and the speaker that day was a man named Terry Collins. At the time, he was the director of the prison system, and he was the last warden I worked for at Lorraine Correctional. I was his clerk for 3 years. So as I was milling by the shrimp table, physically bumped by Terry Collins. He looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" So I just got hired to go back into prison, but I have a small problem. I'm not allowed to go back to prison. And he said, "I will tell you this. I will write a letter tomorrow to every ward in the state of Ohio that says they have my personal permission to let you into their prisons." And he did. I got a call 2 days later from Julius Wilson, who was the warden at Richland Correctional. He said, "I want you in my office on Friday. I will train you myself." And he did. That Sunday, I spoke in prison while on parole, out less than a year. And during the next 5 years, I spoke in every prison in Ohio, including death row, to talk to the men who are left behind, because God has a plan. Amen? So reentry successfully has 4 main keys. The individual who needs to reenter has to take responsibility for his life. A lot of us have sad stories. If you go to any prison in America, they can tell you a tragic story of what happened to them, of abuse, abandonment, and that's true. And what I tell the guys is you can keep using that as an excuse to keep failing, or you can take responsibility from your life from this point forward. And one of the mantras I always repeat is that those who are good at making excuses are rarely good at anything else. The second thing, you have to take advantage of every educational opportunity that you have presented to you. Not everyone's going to be a college graduate who's in prison, but everybody has an opportunity to move a level or two above where they came in at, whether it's getting your ABE, GED, attending trade schools and programs. But that's up to the individual to take advantage of the opportunities that's being presented by the prison system. That's where groups like ours, who can come in as volunteers, encourage men and women to take that next step. Take ownership for your life, take advantage of every opportunity that you have, and do every day as if your release is the next day, whether it's a year from now, 5 years from now, 25 years from now. Don't waste the one commodity that you have, which is time. I always tell guys, there's an interlibrary loan system in prison, so you can get any book in America. I said, the only difference between studying here and in Harvard is just geography, if you choose to apply yourself. So you have to have responsibility for your actions, take advantage of educational opportunities. Third, you have to prepare for reentry. And that takes community partnerships. Most people, when they end up in prison, have already burned every bridge they had, and you have to reestablish those bridges before you get out, or you're bound to come back. So community organizations, we're one of them. I know Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries. The prisons are filled with people who want to come out and build those bridges for them. But no one can make you apply to those opportunities. So begin building and rebuilding those connections to your community. The fourth thing is post-release accountability. You saw the statistics that was just shared a little bit ago. Most of our folks have an addiction recovery issue when they get out. So one things we do here in the University of Cleveland is we have addiction recovery reentry program, and we marry the two things together. Because if we can keep people clean and sober, after they've been clean and sober for a number of years, their chance of successfully reenter skyrockets. But that takes one-on-one accountability. So we assign everyone who comes to us an accountability partner who will make phone calls, or meet with them. We do meet weekly, but then make phone calls throughout the course of the week and ask 3 simple questions. Did you use any drugs this week? Did you go anywhere you were not supposed to go? And did you just lie to me? Ask hard questions. But if you build into accountability and allow people to make sure you're where you're supposed to be, you will succeed. So those are the 4 keys in my mind to successful reentry. That's the things that built into my life that made me to be here today. You know, when Ray said, when people stop asking what you did and what you do, that happened to me at a soccer game. I have 2 children. I've been blessed to be the executive director of True Freedom. We have 5 full-time employees, 5 part-time, 150 volunteers. And I was standing on the sideline watching the soccer game, and a gentleman came next to me and said, "So what do you do?" So I was able to say, I get the opportunity to go to prisons, help people with addiction recovery programs. And it was this is probably 5 years ago, the first time I wasn't asked, "What did you do?" So thank you for your time. Thank you for your involvement. Please, if you're a business owner, do not look past the opportunity. If you hire an ex-offender, that person will be exceptionally loyal to you because they're desperate for the opportunity that no one's ever given them the chance for. And you find out that there's a whole lot of gold mine in prisons. I had a friend of mine say, do you know why they put 2 fences around prisons? Because if you have something valuable, you lock it up. Thank you.